All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're at about 13 people. I'm waiting till we get a few more. So I appreciate your patience. In the meantime, what we're going to be going over today is located under week number 3 module. So if you want to pull that up and look at the week number 3 notes and have them on your screen, you can look over them that way, or you can just follow my screen and take notes individually. We've got to wait, like I said, maybe 2 more minutes here, and then I'm going to have to take roll today, and I'll give you something to think about while I'm taking a roll. But I need to see who's out here and who's not out here, actually, so I can hold people accountable. For those of you who turned in your notes over Mesopotamia yesterday, thank you. I know that John Green talks very quickly, but it can be pretty informative and interesting if you give him a chance. Slowly but surely here, up to 16. All right. We're going to get moving forward here. And I'm going to go ahead and take over your screen for a moment. And I'm in modules here, week number 3. I'm going to pull up week number 3 notes, early civilizations, PowerPoint, redundant notes again. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be working off of. And I've got my own version down here that I was using last night to prepare you guys. So we're going to look at the first civilizations today. But I had a question for you. Think about this. You don't need to respond to me. What I need you to do is try to jot them down on a scrap piece of paper, or write them down on your computer, copy, whatever, type them. What were the first 4 civilizations, and what do they have in common? Okay. I want you to think about that for a couple minutes here as I take roll. So if I say your name, please stay here. Nathaniel. Nathaniel, unmute and please stay here. Nathaniel Amos. Okay, Nathaniel Amos, not here. Maritza.
Here.
Thank you. Chris Barber. Okay. David Brantley. William Brantley. Jordan Bullock.
Here.
Xavier.
Here.
Francesca.
Here.
Davion.
Here.
Jacob. Dirks. Brennan Dixon. Brooklyn Garst.
Here.
Jamie Gaspar. Okay, Chris Gill. Wes Goins. Ethan Greaser.
Here. Here.
Did you get it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Kennedy Hamilton. Kennedy, you out there? Nope. Ian.
Here.
Thank you. Zoe.
Here.
Zariah.
Here.
Thanks. Ben.
Here.
Kamira. Okay. Amaya Murray.
To be out
Here.
there. Some of our good close friends. Just
Thank you. Jeremiah Nelson. Ronisha. Armani.
Here.
Thanks. Luke.
Here.
How do I say your last name, Luke? Root? Luke, how do I say your last name?
Route.
Route. Okay. Timothy, you're here, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Layla Sheard. Kanan Turner.
Here.
Thank you. Chris, are you joining us? Chris Gill. Chris Gill, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, I need you to get here on time, okay?
All right, I'm back.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move forward, folks. I'm still sharing my screen here, so we'll see if anyone else joins. All right, so what were the first four civilizations in the history of our world, and what did they all have in common? Okay. Feel free to use the hand raise function. I'm looking at everybody here. Please turn your video on if you can. And if you want to use the hand raise function, that's the blue button. Go ahead and do that. And all right, Ian, what do you got?
Wasn't one of the first civilizations Mesopotamia?
Okay, so Mesopotamia was one of the four. What else what were the other three?
Africa.
There is one in the continent of Africa. Canaan. Canaan, do you have your hand up? Yeah? You got to unmute for us. There you go.
Egypt, well, ancient Egypt, India, and China.
There you go. So we have Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, India, and China. Correct. Good job. Okay. What did they all have in common? There's one pretty common characteristics that all the first four River Valley civilizations had in common. What was it? Go ahead and raise your hand if you know, please.
Mr. B.
Yeah.
For the first question, can you go over what the answers were again?
Yeah. We're going to talk about all of them today, but it's Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus River Valley in India, and then it's called the Yellow River Valley in China. What did they all have in common? Some of you might have could tell when I was saying that. Ian?
They were all next to a river or a body of water.
Yeah. Basically, they all relied on a river for life. And that's because the river provides nutrients into a soil when it floods, and then it provides for good farming. And the whole key to starting a civilization, as we talked about last week, was to be able to farm and create surpluses so that they could have more food, more people, and eventually they could have trade. So they could trade their surpluses for things that they didn't have. All right, you guys, we got there in a roundabout way. Good job. We're going to get moving here. So, again, I'll kind of show you what you need to write down. You definitely don't need to write everything down as we move forward here. All right, so the first thing we really want to talk about, just so we basically understand this, and I didn't go over it last week, was a civilization is a group of people living and working together for the purpose of creating an organized society. So, group of people living and working together to create an organized society. It sounds very vague or common sense, but before there were civilizations, it wasn't common sense, and people didn't live or work together to create an organized society. They lived or worked just to provide for themselves. And so there's this idea nowadays that we live and work to provide for ourselves, but also we give some of what we have to the public so that it can create a more organized place. Okay. And so, I mean, just a lot of the different issues we have in our country today, it makes us wonder why we're in a civilization, right? What are the benefits? What is it meant to be? And so this is a good look back at the first civilizations and where a lot of the foundations came from that exist today. There are 8 basic characteristics of a civilization. You guys want to make sure you jot these down in your notes, and we'll most likely do an activity with them tomorrow. The first one is the development of writing systems. Wesley Goings, are you here? Can you unmute, Wesley, and tell me if you're here?
I'm here.
Okay, let's get here on time tomorrow, please. Thank you. Set that alarm. All right, so first one is writing systems. Example of a writing system would be, like we're going to talk about today, cuneiform or hieroglyphics, okay? Or writing on oracle bones. The second one then is some kind of infrastructure. Infrastructure could also be called public works, but this would be something like a road that benefits all people. It could be a dam, which dams up a river and allows for it to be controlled and it's flooding and used for water purposes. It could be a bridge. It could be like an airport today. There's a lot of different things that infrastructure is. Okay. The third one then is organized governments and laws. So what you see here is a picture of the Roman Senate. And so some type of organization that dictates or mandates what you can and cannot do and makes laws for the general populace. All right, continuing on. One of the defining characteristics of civilizations is the idea that there is art and architecture. if people were to go back and look at Indianapolis, let's say we had a massive earthquake and it buried our city in a bunch of ashes. What do you guys think people would remember if they uncovered Indianapolis? What would they say that our love for art and architecture was? Feel free to raise your hand. What would people say, you guys think? Francesca, what do you think?
They'll probably discover like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, exactly. Or Lucas Oil Stadium, or Bankers Life Fieldhouse, or Victory Field, or a lot of the gyms around here, the high school gyms and football fields, and they're going to say, man, these guys really valued some kind of large spectator sport, right? I mean, we look back at ancient Rome and we see the Colosseum and we start to think, well, they valued violence and gladiatorial games and entertainment. Well, they're going to think that we were pretty interested in that. They'll probably say something about churches or religious buildings as well, because there's quite a few of those around, etc. So that's what defines, one of the ways to define a civilization is art and architecture. All right, another one then. Minimize this, is going to be social classes. So the first civilizations, you could identify pretty clearly already a distinct difference in people and in their job titles, which would lead to a level of respect or a chain of respect based on what they did. And even though you want to say that there's not that in the United States today, there definitely is. If you look at any civilization, there's the story of the haves versus the have-nots. If you listen to the video on Mesopotamia yesterday, history comes from the upper class typically. And so you're not told quite often how the lower classes lived. Okay, but social classes are definitely defining characteristic. Let's move on then. Organized religion. Organized religion here, you see a statue of the Buddha, which is in Southeast Asia today. Originally, the Buddha didn't want statues made of him. But organized religion gives people a reason, a moral compass for people to live and try to live better life so that they can have a good afterlife. And it really is helpful to the government to sponsor some type of organized religion, as it keeps people in order and it keeps people from acting out and, causing anarchy. The next one then, we've got job specialization. So not everybody can be a farmer. Not everybody can be a doctor. Not everybody can be a engineer, etc. Okay. Yesterday on that video by John Green, they talked about it a little bit, this thing called socialism. Socialism is where, the farmers in that time would pay a lot of their taxes in grain so that the people who didn't farm would get allotments of grain given to them so that they didn't have to farm so they could do other jobs. And it's a little bit similar today. If all of us had to make all of our own food in our backyards and go out and kill all of our own animals, I think that we would not have time to do other things that we're supposed to be doing. All right, last but not least then, are development of large cities. Here you can see a depiction of what they thought the city of looked like in Sumer. Okay, you can see a well-developed bridge. You can see well-developed walls to protect the city. You can see commerce going back and forth. You can see the development of roads, of a ziggurat, of large structure for people to worship at. So a lot of the characteristics of a civilization can be defined in a city. You look at the city we live in, 465 is a circle around the city, but we have city blocks going up from Meridian all the way up to the north side. And that definitely helps us. And the development of cities is a place for a lot of people to be able to live together in close quarters, which over time has seemed like a stupid idea because there's been a lot of pandemics and a lot of death caused by that. But it also affords people the luxury of being able to do all the other things we talked about here, the other 7, because of the ability to live in a city. All right, tomorrow we're going to be doing an activity with these. Hopefully you have them written down. You got an idea of what they are, okay? Anybody have any questions over why these are important fundamental characteristics of a civilization? Feel free to ask. You guys get it? Okay, cool. All right, we're going to move on, and we're going to briefly look at the first 4 River Valley civilizations then. All right, so if you guys take a look at the map on the screen, I think it was Ian who said it earlier, but the first 4 civilizations all developed around major bodies of water that they were able to use to, again, farm, which then created surpluses, okay? Another thing is these are all in which hemisphere, the Eastern or Western hemisphere? Somebody unmute and tell me, are these in the Eastern or Western hemisphere?
Eastern.
Bingo. Okay, so you'll notice these are all in the Eastern hemisphere, and they are all in similar lines of latitude, okay? Meaning that the amount of sunlight and rain that they received, and then the fact that they're along these rivers gave them the advantage of having water and then providing soil for them to farm. All right. Briefly, the Tigris-Euphrates civilization are also known as Mesopotamia, okay? Things that we pull from Mesopotamia are the first writing form known as cuneiform. All right? And why we think this is the first known writing form is because we're able to translate it using the stone known as the Rosetta Stone. All right? And unfortunately, most of what we have are just public records of rich people in business transactions. But we're able to decipher this wedge-shaped writing as the earliest known records and record keeping about 5,000 years ago, so about 3000 BC. We know that they were polytheistic. You can see that by, if you look on the left-hand side, this is known as a ziggurat. And so the earliest religion, known as animism, kind of morphed into the worshiping of different goddesses and then gods that were connected to nature, which the idea was it would bring them consistent flooding, which this area did not flood consistently. It was unpredictable, created a lot of death. There was a lot of war. So the people started sacrificing part of what they had to the gods and goddesses to ask for good luck and ask for good fortune. Over time, what happened is these places, these temples that they would make the sacrifices at, got bigger and bigger. And the largest structures in Mesopotamia were these buildings right here known as ziggurats. And the idea was the higher that they got, the closer that they were to the gods, and the better that sacrifice would be. Now, sacrifices are very common in this time. The Israelites in the Old Testament sacrificed also. And sacrifices could be anything from a newborn calf, a sheep, a goat, to sacrificing your youngest daughter's virginity to the gods. And the priests, the high priests, who would eventually become the kings, would be the only ones allowed in the highest part of this temple, the ziggurat, and it's from there that they would receive these sacrifices. And so this became a very important part of the culture as it developed into the government as well. We know that the Mesopotamian culture came up with the counting system to keep track of records. They were not unified. At times they were. Sargon the Great and the Akkadians were the first to take over all of the city-states around Mesopotamia. But there was constant warfare. Slavery was very common because of the amount of farming that needed to be done. But also it was not slavery like you think of in plantation slavery or slavery in the Atlantic slave trade. This was slavery that was based off of maybe you went into debt, and so to pay off your debt, you would go in and have to be a slave. Maybe you were a prisoner of war, and so you had to serve a certain amount of years as a slave, and then you could get your freedom. And you could buy your freedom as a slave as well. All right. You don't need to write this down, but you can see about 5,500 years ago was when the city-states were the first civilization was around. And you can see the Akkadians, Uruk took over, and then they weren't really organized until a group of people from the north, known as the Babylonians, were the first ones to take them over completely. And the Babylonians, probably the most famous Babylonian king or emperor was Hammurabi, who we'll talk about here in a second. All right, so when Mesopotamia was organized, they were organized around 1900 BC by the Babylonians. And the Babylonians had a few notable themes. First off, they were able to expand using organized warfare. King Hammurabi was known as the person to create the first organized law code, which I hope we can take a look at tomorrow also. He was said to have built what's known as the Hanging Gardens, which was this beautiful ziggurat you see on the left that had 7 stories on it, and it was able to water itself from the moat that was around it. So it had a moat going around it. And it was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world that was it's been destroyed since then. But it's also the place where Alexander the Great decided he was going to live after he took over the known world. Guys, pretty impressive structure. The city of Babylon itself was extremely advanced for the time. I wanted to show you guys the walls that surrounded it. This is what the city looked like. The protectors, you've got wild cows that existed at the time, and then the serpent-headed creatures protecting the city. This is the 7th gate into the entrance of the city of Babylon. So there are a lot of different gates to get in. And then on the right-hand side, upper right, you can see the cuneiform, which represents this was dedicated to their gods. And then the blue tile and the yellow tile came from different mixes that they made out of the clay in the river. Okay, absolutely amazing. These pictures, I got them out of the Pergamon Museum. It's a museum that's located in Germany, and you can go there today. They stole all this out of Iraq in the late 1800s, and when imperialism was going on. And if you go there, like I said, you can see these towers and everything they rebuilt. And this was from about 3,700 years ago. Pretty impressive. All right, couple ideas of this first law code. It was very harsh and it was class-based. Okay, you guys have probably heard an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. That would leave a lot of eyeless people and toothless people. But it was fair. If a man has stolen a child, he shall be put to death. If a woman has not been discreet, has gone out, ruined her house, and belittled her husband, she shall be drowned. So you can see there's an emphasis here on Protecting children. This one is women. If they're being promiscuous, doesn't say if a man has gone out and been discreet, just as a woman. Okay, you can see the difference between man and gender roles here. And then 195, if a son has struck his father, his hand shall be cut off. Doesn't say if a father has struck his son. So here you start to see kind of the idea of worship your mother and father, honor your mother and father, which is somewhat similar to the 10 Commandments in the Israelites, which we'll talk about next week a little bit. Okay, we'll get into this later, but these are examples of the first law code written around mid-1700s BC, so about 3,700 years ago. All right, we got to move on here. We've got a couple minutes left. You guys have seen the Nile River Valley for civilization. This is going to be ancient Egypt. One thing I want you to pay attention to is the Nile River is the longest river in the world that flows from the south to the north. It doesn't flow from north to south. So it actually flows downhill from where is modern-day Ethiopia and Sudan down into the Mediterranean Sea. Some defining characteristics of this Egyptian culture. We might have time to look at this more later, but they too were ruled by a pharaoh. The pharaoh could be male or female, and the pharaoh was viewed as a living god. The pharaoh then had what's known as a bureaucracy, which is an early form of government where you have ministers to do your jobs for you. So you have one minister that's going to be over slaves. You have one minister that's over dikes and dams, keep the river from flooding. You have one minister that's in charge of keeping track of how much grain there is, one minister for administering laws, etc. We have the same type of government today, and we call it the cabinet system in the United States, where our president gets to nominate who's going to be on his or her cabinet. The Egyptians also were polytheistic, where they had a very, very, very complex view of the afterlife, where their soul would be weighed against a feather, and they had to have everything, every earthly possession that they had to be buried with them. So that's why you see such elaborate pyramids and tombstones. One of my friends was there last year and showed me a picture right before COVID hit, and unbelievable. They're still in some of these, the geometric shapes and the complexity of these tombstones, and the fact they're still finding them in something in perfect condition, shows you the sophistication of this culture, and how dedicated they were to their gods. They built on cuneiform to use hieroglyphics, which was closer to an alphabet, but not exactly an alphabet. Symbols, which represented pictures or ideas, things. And then the Egyptians also came up with the calendar. It wasn't accurate, but they figured out the sun revolved around the earth. It took 24 hours, and so they were able to break the day up into 24 hours. Slavery was very important in Egyptian culture as well. All right, the timeline, you can see this. There's really three periods of time in Egyptian culture: the Old Period, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The one that you talk about the most, you think about the most, is when the Egyptians controlled large areas of Mesopotamia under the New Kingdom. And this is when a lot of their scientific discoveries, and this is when they controlled the Israelites. By around 1000 BC, though, there were other pretty famous and pretty important civilizations like the Hittites and the Assyrians that caused them havoc. And even though they would decline, Egypt would retain its own personal autonomy all the way until the Roman Empire took it over. Even Alexander the Great and the Greeks, when they took over Egypt, they called themselves pharaohs, and they continued the line of the pharaoh all the way until approximately like 47 BC. Pretty impressive run. All right, you guys have seen the pyramids before. Imagine doing all that work without the use of a wheel. Okay, that's absolutely crazy. Think about how much manpower that would take. All right, third civilization is the Indus River Valley. And if you go back here, the Indus River Valley, this is the Indian subcontinent. There are two major mountains, the Hindu Kush Mountains here on the left, and then running across on the upper right-hand side to the north east are the Himalaya Mountains. Below them makes really, really good farming, which is where civilization started in India, known as the Indus River Valley. We don't really know too much about them because they disappeared. They've literally, it was either massive warfare, and more believe that it was like an earthquake that covered up the two major cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So everything we know is that whatever they've uncovered and dug up in the last 50 years. But we think by about 2,500 BCE, so 4,500 years ago, the Indians populated this area. There have been figurines found from Mesopotamia there, so they thought they traded with Mesopotamia, but not with China. And it was obvious that farming was important, and they came up with some other pretty cool stuff as well. I want to show you here. So this is believed to have been the city. You can see how planned out it is. They don't know exactly what the structure on the bottom is. They think it was for some kind of religious worship, a temple of sorts. But they know that they had multi-storied buildings because they looked at the skulls of remains they found, and it showed you that people fell off of high roofs onto the ground. They also discovered, I'm going to see if I have a picture of it. I forget. I don't. Dumb. But in here is a big public bath. So they had a large public bath that had running water to it 4,000, 5,000 years ago, which is absolutely crazy for that time. You can see how well their bricks were made if you look at this picture. So this was fairly advanced society that we don't know all that much about due to the fact that it was covered up by a natural disaster. The fourth civilization then is the Yellow River Valley Civilization, also known as Shang China, or the Shang Dynasty. And this was a little bit later, around 4,000 years ago. It was built around the Yellow River Valley. And they used their what's called ideographic writing, which was basically at first they would take oracle bones, throw them in a fire, and the high priests would then interpret them as however they cracked. And then that writing would turn into a type of character which would represent a picture. And so it's really just a symbol to represent a picture, which then turns into a more elaborate type of writing system. Okay, you start to see silk and porcelain made during the Shang Dynasty, so around 1500 BCE. Okay, and those are two of the most famous exports of the Chinese, which would be in very, 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 very high demand even to this day. Okay, I remember how much porcelain I got at my wedding. It still sits in a big box. I've never used it. My mom said I had to have it, yada, yada. Okay. The first family to rule over the Yellow River was known as the Shang. So they call them the Shang Dynasty. And they would create the position of the emperor, which lasted all the way until 1912 CE. So all the way until about 100 years ago, there was an emperor in China. Okay. Last but not least here, I know I'm going to give you guys some time to get to class. But basically, River Valley civilizations would set up the culture and the politics, society, and economic structure for other civilizations that would exist after them. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these key features tomorrow. I want to remind you guys your homework is week number 3 intro. It's the same textbook reading as last week. So it's called World History 1 Redo because I had to redo it because it had all the pages. It's 20 points in. It's due by midnight tonight. If you don't get it turned in by midnight tonight, it's 20% if you turn it off if turned in late. All right. I've got about 3 minutes left. I want to take any questions anybody has. I'm not going to stop the share so you guys can make sure you see what the homework is. You had yesterday to work on that also. Go ahead and unmute if you have any questions. If not, feel free to leave, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Bye, Mr. B.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
You're welcome. Did you have to answer the guided questions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Chris or Jordan, do you have any questions?